family is what you make it. And having been a part of a family, I will call it lowercase f because it's close and immediate and super. And that was my everything. And then family, even though we were close, and you'd think that because there wasn't that many of us that we would seek out everybody that we could.
Right.
But we didn't. And now the closeness and the proximity, like holding my dying mother, I would say I actually maybe, this is a weird thing to say now that I'm thinking about it, feel closer to her right now as I sit here than I did for the previous 10 years. And that really underscores to me the fact that it is whatever you make it. And on reflection, I feel like making the choice to make it be something. As a lifelong storyteller, I believe that's true. Like, we all have a story. That's what your book is about, and that's what the show is about, essentially. You know, how are we all sort of normal because we all only experience our own life, and yet so myriad, so different, so individual and unique. That's part of the universality of this sort of like life and death thing that I've been sort of marinating on.
Yeah.
I was aware that it was cool, but not how cool. And I was aware that it was making an impression on me, but I didn't know how much of an impression.
Right.
And it absolutely has made for now that my mom has passed, that was the person I was very, I spent the most time with of the two of them. And to now be, basically on my dad's hip this month. And honestly, she's been sick for a couple of years. She had Alzheimer's, which is a tough one, man. It's a rough one.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of listeners or watchers could identify with that if you've been through it. So she's been sick for a long time. So we kind of have banded together as a family, which has also been fascinating. But indeed, there's like a little switch on my just role position in the family. It's been kind of interesting.
Welcome to Identified, where we explore, challenge, and redefine the traditional concepts of family and identity. In this episode, I am joined by acclaimed artist, author, and entrepreneur Chase Jarvis.
I didn't know anything. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, only child meant you were super spoiled. I'm like, no, my dad was a cop. My mom was a secretary. The house never got above like 62 degrees. My mom didn't bake cookies because sugar was expensive.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This is like some 70s stuff.
Yeah, totally.
Wow, sugar was expensive. I've never actually even heard that.
No one's ever said that except my mom.
Yeah, that's like old-timey.
Totally, but she never told me until I was like 40.
Right. What was your neighborhood like? Were you a normal kid? Were you a poor kid? It doesn't sound like you were a rich kid.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. I would probably consider myself social status, thought of as high, economic status, middle to lower middle, I would say middle class. Again, my dad was a cop, my mom was a secretary, and we grew up in the suburbs of Seattle. I lived in 2 houses in my entire life. They built both of them with their bare hands.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Like Do you remember the building of the second one?
I absolutely remember both of them like it was yesterday. It was very formative in making me a creative person. And I was the only child, so I had to play in the backyard or in the middle of the construction.
Imaginary friends.
Yeah, exactly. Throwing dirt clods and with trucks and literally a couple blocks of wood. My dad would work all night as a cop and then get like 4 hours of sleep and then come work at the job site building our homes. My mom stained every single piece of wood in the whole place. They laid every brick. They did every single thing themselves with some help. They would hire help. But that's basically all I knew coming up, which is really interesting, very creative environment and very nothing went to waste. Everything had, served like 4 functions.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Very thrifty too. Very thrifty.
And I don't think of any place I've lived as being creative other than, of course, whatever, my wife and I get to decide what the art looks like.
Sure.
But like the actual space itself, you choose the one of the choices that you can figure out and you take it. But you twice in your young life,
very young,
you saw that as something you actually get to create yourself.
I did. And it was fascinating because emotionally it was interesting because I was aware that we were always saving money, and yet we definitively lived in the nicest neighborhood in my town outside of Seattle. So my friends thought of me as the rich kid, and I'm like, I had upside down Nikes. I had Adidas with 4 stripes. Not even exaggerating. Like literally, my mom.
Bootlegs? Is that what that was?
Yeah,
upside down Nikes.
I swear, like exactly, like upside down Nikes. And so there was this. My parents, they were super smart. They put everything into real estate that they could then leverage into other socioeconomic status. Essentially, while my friends were going to the other side of the mountains to Lake Chelan for vacation, I was going to London for 3 weeks. The contrast was interesting, and I didn't really understand enough about it until I was older to realize like, oh, that's actually kind of a weird childhood experience.
Yeah, and that's in Seattle too. I mean, we met in Seattle. I lived there from age 20-ish to 35 or something like that. I moved there in the 90s when I still think Seattle was kind of a small town, so I can't imagine what it felt like in the 70s.
Yeah.
I think now, obviously, Seattle's a pretty big city and, you know, the internet's there or whatever.
Internet,
but like,
all the tech.
Yeah, but it was a pretty small town. So to be a kid that took vacations to London from Seattle is probably pretty rare.
Transformative.
Right?
I mean, Mohawks, Piccadilly Circus, Trafalgar Square, the Clash, leather jackets. I would come back from those trips and always had different music than all my friends. And it was in a weird twist. So I mentioned my dad was a cop and he worked super long hours to pay for basically all this stuff. And, you know, the building of the homes. And in addition to that, he would do the sports games. So he worked the home bench and the home locker room for every Seattle sports event. So all the soccer games, all the basketball games, all the baseball games.
Aren't there like 100 baseball games a year?
Yes, 50, whatever, 80 home games. Exactly. All of those pro athletes, my dad ended up becoming friends with all these pro athletes. And so what we would do is we would travel overseas, have a free place to stay at our friends' places in Europe. And they were all basically, especially soccer, was players who were most likely going to retire soon. They would had played 10 years at Manchester United. Would come eke out a couple of extra years in soccer as the new leagues were forming, and those became some of my dad's best friends. So I would, fly back there and stay at their epic houses and stuff and go around with super famous people.
Yeah.
So that alchemy was really weird, like local kid and kind of poor, living a really different existence, living in the nicest neighborhood and traveling, running around with superstar athletes, like the captain of the English national soccer team.
That's wild.
Yeah. It took me out of this small town, but only temporarily, enough to get a taste of crazy culture, like breakdancing and stuff like that. Like, I was like, wow, downtown inner city London. I credit that. Whether my parents did this knowingly, I think they did. It was a fascinating experience to have those two worlds.
Yeah. Did you ever wish you had a sibling? Did a lot of your friends have siblings?
Yeah, it was strange, and I got asked that question a lot growing up, but I was like, you don't know anything different.
Right.
Undeniably, people would think, when I would say that, oh, you are spoiled, you are, you get all of the attention, and I did not feel spoiled. Like, financially, probably was part of that. Like, I got $5 per week for lunch at school. Lunch was $1 a day.
Which leaves $0 for anything else.
Anything else. And I could spend it all on Monday. And my mom would literally be like, good luck, dude.
It's a good lesson, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I mean,
if that's spoiled, well, then I was spoiled.
Right.
And if that's, I don't know.
And then even on the attention side, it sounds like your father was working a ton. So you can't have spent a ton of time with him as a kid, right? Yeah.
Exactly. He was always there for my sports stuff. I went to college on a soccer scholarship. I played on the U.S. Olympic Development soccer team. And I was basically an athlete, mostly because it was natural. And ironically, I had some teachers young in my career that were like, I was a very creative kid. See earlier point about like building stuff on the job site and whatnot. And I had a stand-up comedy routine. I had a magic show. I had a comic strip that I published in second grade that was exactly the price of milk. So you could either get your milk or you could buy my comic strip. And I had a second grade teacher that shut all that stuff down and said, look, the second grade is no place for this kind of stuff. And, you're good at sports. You should stick with sports.
Right.
And, as this is what I realize, looking backwards, is that all a kid does is try and like keep up with the adults in their universe and try and make other people happy and proud. So it ended up serving me, but I would ultimately come back to that. And it was a lot of that travel that I talked about that sort of like, where is that part of me that I knew I had? That was an important piece of my human as a young person. I ultimately came back to that. But it was a really interesting alchemy in a very, very small family. I also, not only am I an only, but I have no cousins. My dad has a brother who has no children, and my mom had a sister who had no children. And so
one aunt, one uncle.
Yep. And I had two uncles. One died in Vietnam. My dad's the oldest, but essentially it netted me no cousins, which was also crazy. So I'm the only person, and I was forced to, there was no kids table.
Right.
Because there wasn't anybody to sit with. So I sat at the adult table and had adult conversations. And
Were your grandparents in the picture as a kid?
My dad's dad died he died at 54, the same year I was born, essentially, of a heart attack. His mom was around, and my grandma on my mom's side also was around. My grandpa was a little bit estranged, kind of lived out in the woods. He was a city slicker that became a farmer, and I wasn't close with him. So it was mostly the grandmas that were around, but crazy small family.
Yeah.
And I think that had all sorts of pluses and minuses. The plus being that I had to have adult conversations. You know, I essentially grew up fast. And you can obviously see the flip side of that is, well, also then you didn't get to, you know, do a lot of the kid shit that you might otherwise have done. And it's been fascinating now to, at a different part of my life, my mom just passed away during the holidays. We're recording this in January, so like 3 weeks ago, right in the middle, you know, right before Christmas. So she died, then Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, New Year's Day. Her birthday is January 4th. Happy birthday to you, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're still 29. It looks great.
I mean, it just keeps happening.
Now having some perspective on that, going through that was fascinating. When you only have, I mean, we all have two parents, right? But with a very small family, and it's been a really interesting reflection thinking about all that. It's a really interesting reflective time for me, familially.
And it's interesting because, I mean, I don't want to say it's not a plus. There's no upside of your mother dying, but you were just talking about coming from Palm Springs and kind of taking care of your father, which is just a new, interesting thing to have happen in your life.
Totally fascinating. I would say as a young person, most of my time was spent with my mom for the exact same reasons. We would, you know, except for my sports. My dad was always there for sports. My mom was always there too. They were both super supportive. And as I mentioned, my second grade teacher talked me into sports. So I was kind of the jock, captain of the football team, dated the cheerleader. Very cliche to the point of realizing it and being heartbroken that I left this really creative part of me younger in school behind. Checked all the cultural boxes and sort of felt empty in the process. But both my parents were always there for sports. As you mentioned, my dad was very, very busy, but I remember taking the bus downtown to meet up with him, and we would get to go to most of these sports games. And
so cool.
But go down on the field and hang out and meet all the players. And whatnot.
I mean, as a kid, that's
totally
insane.
Yeah. And I was aware that it was cool, but not how cool. And I was aware that it was making an impression on me, but I didn't know how much of an impression.
Right.
And it absolutely has made for now that my mom has passed, that was the person that I was very, you know, I spent the most time with of the two of them. And to now be, you know, basically on my dad's hip is this month. And honestly, she's been sick for a couple of years. She had Alzheimer's, so which is a tough one, man. It's a rough one.
Yeah.
And I'm sure a lot of listeners or watchers could identify with that if you've been through it. So she's been sick for a long time. So we kind of have banded together as a family, which has also been fascinating. But indeed, there's like a little switch on my just role position in the family. It's been kind of interesting.
So my mother is in really good shape. She's just turned 75 this year. But it's something I think about the older she gets, that, I mean, it's inevitable. It is. Someday.
Mother Nature undefeated.
Yeah.
That's 1,000.
And she's married to a wonderful guy who, of course, will be around. But it's weird to think that eventually the person who takes care of you a lot of people end up taking care of in some way. Some ways much more serious than others. But that weird role reversal.
Yeah. That has been fascinating. I think as a family unit, because we were very small, tiny unit, we were all very close. They met at Dick's Hamburgers in 1966, which if you know anything about Seattle, that's like
a staple.
Yeah,
classic.
you met at In-N-Out or whatever the equivalent is, or White Castle.
This is right. Sir Mix-a-Lot raps about Dick's, right?
Yeah, exactly.
My posse's on Broadway.
Dick's is a place where the cool hang out. The swats like to play in the rich flaunt clout.
Oh, okay. Now I have to pay publishing.
Yeah, there we go. Oh, sorry. But yeah, they met at Dick's in 1966, and they've been their ride or dies. They've, you know, traveled all over the world together. They both retired very early. My mom worked at a biotech company that created the drug Cialis, which was a company that they took public. So my mom did really well in that. And my dad had a pension. He started on the force at, I think, 19 and was a full cop by 20. Interesting side note, they put you on the street before you're trained with a gun before you're trained
in Seattle specifically.
In Seattle, I don't know, but in that era,
good to know. Yeah.
But he had an amazing pension back then.
When did he retire? What age?
At 45.
Oh, get out of here!
Yeah.
So that's a wild story, because that's like, I mean, my wife Allie, she's a financial planner, and I've learned a lot about sort of different things that are happening. And there's this FIRE. It's basically people who work super hard and make as much money as you can and sort of do nothing. Don't travel, don't spend anything for the shortest amount of time you can to retire early. It's financial independence, retire early, FIRE. It's a huge, it's a total movement that's happening in America.
Okay.
So the idea is, look, you might not have a lot of fun in your 20s or 30s, but by the time, you know, in your 30s, you'll retire. You can do whatever you want for the rest of your life because you made it. And I'm not saying your parents did that, but it does sound like an interesting early version of that, because they were working so hard, being smart, saving, and then were somehow able to retire at a really young age.
Before there was an acronym for it.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Early fire adopters.
Who knew fire was so valuable?
That's wild, though.
I think contributed to both their closeness, because then they would spend a lot of time. Their deal was travel. See earlier point where my friends were going camping with their parents in the summer and I was going overseas.
Yeah.
So they're travel bug and they really appreciated, culturally all the different experiences. And they would, and they do it like a month in Africa,
like real vacation.
5 weeks in China, go to learn.
Right, because you're not coming back to work. It's not a week off twice a year.
Yeah, and they do that probably 3 or 4 times a year. My dad, I was just helping him. I booked a trip with him or for him to Vietnam here in a couple weeks. And I was on the phone as him, helping him book it.
Right.
I'm like, oh, Mr. Jarvis, I see you're the Sir Edmund Hillary level traveler with us. You've, done 31 overseas travels.
Oh, that's incredible.
And, now my dad's 78. That travel piece is still a really, really important thing for him and for them.
Will you go on any trips with him? Do you have any big things planned?
I was going to golf with him in Vietnam. It's the hot new golf zone.
Oh, is it really?
Vietnam is,
I should know that.
Yeah. And it just got complicated. I was like, okay, I'll fly into Da Nang and I'll meet you in Ho Chi Minh City. And I was just, especially in the wake of my mom passing, he was just sort of like disoriented. So I was like, this is a little overwhelming, isn't it? And he was like, yeah, maybe. But we are going to Scotland to play St. Andrews.
Oh, amazing.
For a week in
that's
May.
the father-son dream, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's it.
It is.
Yeah.
So we're doing that, doing that kind of stuff.
That's great.
And, again, I think the wake of my mom passing has made, this is a great example. Just so many things are showing up in my life that have family and connection and mother. And I look at the moon and I think of my mom. There's just this presence. And even this podcast, I have done hundreds of these shows, been a guest, hosted and been a guest.
Yeah.
And like family has not, your book was really intriguing to me and really interesting, A, because I've known you, and B, just it's work of genius. And here we are talking about it. I wouldn't have had anything to say. I wouldn't have felt I had anything to say a year ago.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
But you would have. This obviously is, of course, reframing things and shaping things,
Yeah.
but it sounds like you had a really interesting family background.
It was very
without the tragedy.
When you don't have anything else to compare it to, you feel like every childhood is normal, right?
Yeah.
When you're living in it. And it's only on reflection that you realize you have to go to therapy for this shit.
Of course.
For all of the family dynamics that we encounter.
Tell your mom, obviously a small family, but was there much more tragedy or loss?
My dad comes from a whole bunch of loss. His brother died in Vietnam.
Oh, right. You mentioned that.
A year later, his dad dropped dead of a heart attack. And that really just heartbroke his mom, as you can imagine. So there's always been sort of a heavy layer of grief around that. And my dad's they're Scandinavian, Finn, Norwegian. So stoic as hell.
Okay.
Stiff upper lip. There's that generation. I think they're actually called the quiet generation. I don't know where boomers start and stop. Forgive me about all that. But
the quiet generation's before boomers?
I think it's just right before boomers.
I think so.
That totally matches up with them. So there wasn't a lot of conversation about, childhood stuff. Most of that I've had to draw out of them. And my dad has a gazillion stories from being a cop in Seattle through all the Vietnam riots and through all the sports stuff.
Wow,
and he used to work all the music. Also, told me a story last night that I hadn't heard.
Zeppelin at the Kingdom or something?
Oh, all of those things. He literally, Zeppelin at the Kingdom.
Incredible.
Neil Diamond, John Denver, the Beatles. Everything. Paul McCartney, he was backstage smoking cigarettes with Paul McCartney in his dressing room. And Paul McCartney said to my dad, hey, can you kick that dude out of here? And that dude was Geraldo Rivera. So my dad tells me, he's got
pretty good.
1,000 of those stories, right? 1,000 of those stories. So I don't remember what got me on that, but it was a different childhood, but you don't know how different it is relative to your peers until you start talking about it as a grown-up.
Yeah, and it's interesting to look back to. I have a pandemic project for me. I've always had, my mom was so good about taking pictures and saving them, and I'm so glad. It's one of the best things I have is, albums and albums. I don't know, probably 1,000 photographs, a lot of my grandparents, all on my mom's side, great-grandparents, stuff that goes really far back, but tons from my childhood. And in the pandemic, once I realized, a week in, I was like, oh, this isn't ending. I'm finally going to do this. I bought a fancy scanner and spent tons of time just digitizing everything, which means I looked at every single one, read the date on the back, because lots of them have handwritten dates, like really cataloged all of these photos, I think, in the actual order they were taken. I mean, I was like, my mom's wearing that same dress. I think these are the same day. Like, it was like this incredible puzzle.
Wow.
At the time, you're just living. And as just a kid, I was like, I remember that. I don't remember anything special about that.
Totally.
But looking at this, what an incredible, like, weird, interesting life I actually had. And I can see it now. I just couldn't see it then. And it just takes hindsight.
Yeah. And I think as a lifelong storyteller, I believe that's true. Like, we all have a story. That's what your book is about. And that's what the show is about, essentially. You know, how are we all sort of normal because we all only experience our own life, and yet so myriad, so different, so individual and unique. That's part of the universality of this sort of life and death thing that I've been sort of marinating on.
Yeah.
I'm also doing the same thing, going back and look at the kitchen table or the dining room table at my dad's house is basically just covered with pictures and mementos, and because he's just been going through all that stuff and heartbroken, as you can imagine.
Be so hard.
And it's also beautiful. Like 3 or 4 days ago, I read a handwritten letter from my then 19-year-old uncle a short time before he was killed in Vietnam. Like, I'd never seen it before, didn't know it existed.
Was the letter from Vietnam?
It was from Vietnam.
Oh my God.
Yeah, and it was to my dad and my mom, and it was just like younger brother talking to older brother about how, you know, hope I get out of here alive. It was just absolutely amazing, and you know, simultaneously beautiful and incredibly heavy. But it has been an interesting impetus to sort of re-explore a lot of the stuff, not dissimilar to you. Photographs, a bunch of time on your hands, a scanner.
Right.
And then you start putting these puzzle pieces together.
Yeah.
I hope everyone at some point chooses the opportunity to do that. However much pain or joy it brings, you know, probably a good dose of both. Yeah. How many people have been, and billions of people, death, Mother Nature's undefeated. So how many people have gone through the thing that I'm going through, you know? Right. And obviously billions, and yet that's part of this sort of individuality and universality that has just been head scratch lately. It's been a fascinating journey. How about with your dad and those photographs relative? How did that come and go through your journey when you were doing that?
What's so interesting about that to me, I mean, I'd never known my father, didn't grow up with him, met him briefly a couple times as a kid. So he is in 0 of those photographs.
That's what I was wondering.
Thousands or hundreds, maybe 1,000 on my mom's side from every era, and nothing
0
on my dad's side. Not that I was expecting them. Sure. I knew this.
Well, I thought you might have uncovered a couple.
No, that would have been interesting. Yeah. But it's still fascinating. But that was still part of it. And I was also, I think we're still maybe finishing my book during that time period, but to realize like, wow, I have all of this, but there is nothing over here. There's literally nothing. And it's pretty wild realization. So even, I guess its absence was kind of something.
That was the thing of note. Yeah. I have noticed that element of my dad, and I just love him for it. It wasn't present. I didn't feel it as a child, even though we had a young, small, very, I'd call insular family. Like, there wasn't a talk about, oh yeah, I can't wait to see his cousins, you know, one lives in Canada and the other lives in LA. And we weren't seeking that out. And now, especially in the, you know, this current moment that we're in, there's been a lot of, you know, you mention another family member far away, his cousin, and I can just feel his energy just like wanting to connect with. Yeah, it's really fascinating. I love the journey that you're on with this show, man. You know, I'm not trying to suck any.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Suck up to you at all, fun. But it's such a unique angle that you've brought to this platform. It's really cool.
I got to ask you the final question.
I'm ready for it.
What is family to you?
It feels to me like family is what you make it. And having been a part of a family, I will call it lowercase f because it's close and immediate and super. And that was my everything. And then family, even though we were close, and you'd think that because there wasn't that many of us that we would seek out everybody that we could. Right. But we didn't. And now the closeness and the proximity, like holding my dying mother, I would say I actually, maybe, this is a weird thing to say now that I'm thinking about it, feel closer to her right now as I sit here than I did for the previous 10 years. And that really underscores to me the fact that it is whatever you make it. And on reflection, I feel like making the choice to make it be something is more powerful and important than nothing.
Thanks for tuning in. Please consider subscribing to Identified wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode. We're on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all other major streaming platforms. And be sure to explore identifiedpod.com, the place to gain a better understanding of family. Our executive producer is Kieran Banerjee, and the show is produced by Palm Tree Island. The music for Identified is by Noella and Patricia Brennan. I'm Nabil Ayers. Thanks for tuning in.